Most people assume office betrayal happens in meetings or emails. Mine happened at 7:42 p.m. in an empty hallway when I realized my boss had deleted my entire project folder, the one tied to a $4.2 million client rollout. No warning, no conversation, just gone. And he thought that was the end of it. What he didn't know was that I'm the kind of guy who keeps backups of my backups. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I've watched too many leaders panic under pressure and burn the wrong bridge. That night, staring at the blank directory on my screen, I finally admitted something I'd been trying to ignore for months. Someone in my department wanted me gone, and they weren't subtle anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't report it. I simply opened the real version, the complete 4.2 matter architecture, the version only I had access to, and realized his mistake was bigger than deleting a folder. He'd just deleted the only thing protecting him. You can call me Mark. I'm 38, a senior systems engineer at a mid-sized SaaS company that sells compliance software to banks. We're not a household name, but in our niche, we handle a lot of money for people who hate risk and hate surprises even more. The $4.2 million wasn't my salary. It was the value of a multi-year contract with a regional bank that had finally decided to move their core system onto our platform. For 14 months, that project was basically my second spine. Requirements workshops, integration diagrams, migration scripts, rollback plans, run books, monitoring templates. If it touched their data, I'd touched it. All of that lived in two places. 1. A shared project folder on our internal drive. 2. A main repository and version control that was the official version, the one executives referenced in steering meetings, the one audit would look at if anything went wrong. After an early incident, a teammate accidentally overwrote some of my migration scripts with a broken branch. I quietly set up a mirror on a secure drive only I could access. Same structure, same files, plus my own notes and a few if things go sideways documents. Nothing illegal, nothing shady, just self-preservation in a company where oops could cost millions. I even mentioned it to my boss once. Do whatever you need to feel safe, he said, waving it off. End of the day, if it's not on the shared drive, it doesn't exist. That line would come back to bite him, not me. Darren, that's my boss, is exactly the guy you picture when I say mid-level manager in tech. MBA, good haircut, expensive shoes, fluent in corporate buzzwords. He can talk about alignment, roadmaps, and de-risking for an hour without saying a single concrete sentence. To be fair, he has his uses. He knows how to calm a nervous executive. He knows which charts to show and which numbers to hide. He knows how to walk out of a meeting looking like the adult in the room. What he doesn't know is how to actually do the work. Logs, dependencies, database locks, queue back pressure. That's all Mark's domain. For a while, that worked. He stayed out of the details. I stayed out of the politics. He took the credit externally. I took the responsibility internally. My name was on the architecture docs. His was on the status slides. Then the bank signed the 4.2 mummer extension. Overnight, our migration stopped being a big project and became Darren's flagship. We suddenly had monthly steering committees, extra VPs in our stand-ups, more eyes on every date I gave, every risk I flagged. That's when the little edits started. I'd see calendar invites that used to say Mark and Darren with bank become just Darren Bank. Check-in. I went from solution lead to technical support on one of the decks. I found out about a client call because someone forwarded me Darren's recap, which spent 3 paragraphs describing his integration strategy, the one I'd written. None of that is a crime, but all of it tells you a story. Darren wanted this project to be the thing that got him promoted. The first real crack came in a risk review. The bank's head of IT, a guy who speaks quietly and listens too much, asked a very simple question. If we stop halfway through the migration, how fast can you put us back where we started? Darren jumped in. 2 minutes to snapshot, a couple more to restore. We've de-risked it, he said, smooth, confident. Technically, no. 2 minutes was the theoretical best case. Real life was closer to 4, and only if nothing else was happening on the system. And we still had performance tuning to do if traffic spiked during the window. The IT head turned to me. Mark, you comfortable with that? In that second, I knew exactly what Darren wanted. A nod, a smile, and a lie we could all pretend to believe. I'd say it this way, I answered. Our snapshot window is closer to 4 minutes in practice, and we're still tuning batch performance if volume goes above forecast. We have safeguards, but I wouldn't call it fully de-risked yet. The room went quiet for a beat. Then the IT head nodded slowly. Thank you. That's what I need to know. Darren laughed a little too loudly. That's why I keep Mark around, he joked. He remembers all the scary details. Everyone chuckled. I didn't. After the meeting, he pulled me into a small glass conference room. Don't contradict me in front of the client again, he said. No smile now. I didn't contradict you, I replied. I finished the answer. They'd rather hear we're still tightening it than find out during a rollback at 3 a.m. He stared at me like I'd just betrayed him. Perception is reality, Mark. If you make me look like I don't know my own project, you make us both expendable. Don't do that again. I walked out with a very clear note in my head. When Darren is under pressure, truth is negotiable. Image isn't. Fast forward a few months to that Tuesday night. Most of the floor was dark. The cleaning crew rattled carts near the elevators. I was at my desk, finishing the last boring but critical tasks before our final dress rehearsal. Checking monitoring alerts, updating runbook steps, tightening some logging. Out of habit, I opened the shared project folder. Project BN42 Migration. The folder tree looked normal. Architecture, scripts, runbooks, client docs. I double-clicked scripts. This folder is empty. Okay, that happens sometimes when permissions get messed up. I backed out. Tried architecture. This folder is empty. The little pinch at the base of my skull started. I checked the path again. Same. I tried from a different machine. Same. I opened a remote session to the build server. Same 4 neat, completely empty folders. That's when the air in the room changed. I switched over to our version control system. Repo name, BN42 mainline client. It was there. But the main branch tagged for rollout? Gone. Only a few stale feature branches and old tags remained. We log every admin action. Who did what, when, and from where. I opened the audit trail and filtered by today. There it was, in plain text. 1906-23. User, D. Reynolds. Action, delete folder. Project BN42 Migration, 1906-47. User, D. Reynolds. Action, delete repository. BN42 mainline client. No automation, no script, no service account. My boss, on his own credentials, had deleted the official project folder and the primary repo less than 2 hours earlier. I sat back in my chair and just listened. Distant vacuum. AC hum. The sound your brain makes when it starts putting pieces together you didn't want to line up. If the rollout failed now, whose story would leadership hear? The engineer lost critical files. He didn't follow process. We had to step in and clean things up. If you've ever worked under someone like Darren, you know exactly how fast an unfortunate incident becomes a script that keeps them clean. I took a slow breath, opened my secure drive, and mounted the mirror repository. My version was right where I'd left it. Latest scripts, diagrams, configs, updated monitoring checks, client-approved changes from last week, everything we actually needed to go live, intact. Timestamps, commit history, notes, a trail that showed exactly who had done what and when. I scrolled through one of the main migration scripts. Line after line I knew almost by heart, and something in me shifted. Up to that point, I'd been operating like a loyal employee, trying to protect the company and keep the project on track, even when it meant covering for Darren's shortcuts. Looking at that clean repo next to the audit log of his deletions, I realized I was the only person in the building who understood exactly how much damage he'd just tried to do, and the only person who could prove it. He thought nuking the shared folder would give him a clean narrative if things went south. No messy history, no detailed evidence, no paper trail of his decisions. He had no idea all of that still existed somewhere he couldn't touch. I shut down my monitor, grabbed my jacket, and walked into the dim corridor. For the first time in months, I didn't feel overworked or anxious. I felt finished. Because once you've watched your manager deliberately delete the thing you built, not by accident, but by choice, you stop asking, how do I keep my job? You start asking a different question. When this finally blows up, and it will, how do I make sure the blast lands exactly where it belongs? I showed up the next morning like nothing had happened. Not because I was calm, because I needed to see how Darren would behave before I made my next move. Tech offices have a certain smell at 8:30 a.m. Fresh coffee, stale air, the faint hum of machines waking up, and sometimes the quiet tension of a manager who thinks he got away with something. Darren was already in, which was unusual. He hated mornings. He stood by the whiteboard, marker in hand, sketching something that looked like a network diagram, but made no architectural sense, more for show than clarity. "Morning," he said, fake casual, not looking up. "Morning," I replied. I set my bag down, logged in, and opened a few irrelevant tabs just to watch him in my peripheral vision. He kept glancing at me, tapping the marker, waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to say, "Hey, did something happen to the project folder?" Waiting for the scene where he could tilt his head sympathetically and say something like, "Weird. Must be corrupted. No worries, Mark. We'll rebuild it together." Then he'd discover that I didn't have backups. Then he'd escalate. And then the narrative would be his. He needed me to be confused. I wasn't. At 9:10, he finally broke. "Quick sync," he said, gesturing toward the small conference room. Of course he wanted privacy. Of course he wanted control of the story. I followed him in, sat down, and watched him arrange his face into professional concern. "So," he began, capping the marker dramatically, "we've got a situation. Here we go. The bank wants updated rollback documentation by Friday," he continued, "but it seems like some of the files, aren't where they should be." I kept my expression neutral. "Oh?" I asked lightly. "Which ones?" He gave a controlled sigh, annoyed but pretending to be patient. "Mark, I'm not sure what happened, but half the project folder is empty. Same with the repo. Did you push something weird last night?" He said it like a teacher catching a student breaking a lab tool. "No," I replied. "Did you?" He blinked. Just once. A clean, sharp tell that I'd thrown him off script. "Why would I touch your repo?" he said, laughed too casual. "I don't even commit to it." The audit log in my head read, 1906-23. User, D. Reynolds, delete. But I let him talk. "I'm thinking maybe you moved things to your local machine? Accidentally overwrote the directory?" he pressed. The projection was so transparent, it was almost insulting. "I didn't move anything," I said. His jaw tightened. He was expecting confusion or guilt, maybe fear. He wasn't expecting simplicity. "That's concerning," he said. "Look, I'm on your side here, but we need those files rebuilt ASAP. The last thing we want is leadership finding out we're missing critical deliverables." We. There it was, the word manipulators use when they're building a narrative where you take the fall with them. "We should escalate to IT," I said casually. "File a ticket. They can scan the logs." He froze for half a second, a small perfect pause. Then, "No, no, no, no. Let's not waste time on bureaucracy. You know how slow they are. Let's just rebuild everything clean. Start fresh." Start fresh. As if 14 months of work were a PowerPoint template. "And," he added, lowering his voice, "let's keep this quiet. The fewer people involved, the better." There it was. He needed isolation, silence, a closed circle where he controlled the version of events. I nodded slowly. "Makes sense?" He relaxed. That alone told me everything I needed to know. He thought he owned the situation again. "Great," he said. "I'll push a meeting with the bank to next week. Meanwhile, just focus on restoring everything, okay? And Mark, make sure the new repo follows my architecture outline." I sketched a draft. He handed me a marker-stained sheet of paper. It was bad. Wrong dependencies, wrong data flow, wrong constraints. It looked like someone had tried to design a car engine by looking at a bicycle. I didn't react. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Mark, next time something happens with your files, come to me first. We need to be aligned." Aligned. In Darren's speak, that meant, "Tell me before anyone else sees it so I can spin it." The moment he was gone, I opened my secure mirror, checked the integrity one more time, and gently closed the window. My version was untouched, complete, documented, time stamped. But I understood the real problem now. This wasn't sabotage for fun. This wasn't carelessness. This was premeditated. Why? Because of something that happened the previous Friday. Something I hadn't realized was connected until that moment. We'd had a steering committee meeting with leadership. The CIO, the director of delivery, and the VPs of product were all there. Darren presented the status deck. He'd rewritten sections I'd authored, replacing technical detail with vague promises. Then the CIO asked him, "Darren, if Mark were hit by a bus tomorrow, who else knows the system end to end?" He smiled confidently and said, "I do. Mark's great, but everything we're delivering is collaborative." That was a lie. He didn't know the system. He didn't know the scripts. He didn't know the dependencies. He couldn't even describe the network segmentation without checking Slack. That meeting planted a seed. If leadership believed he had the full picture, then all he needed was for me to become inconvenient, a blocker, a source of delays, someone who wasn't maintaining documentation properly. Deleting the folder wasn't the plan. It was the execution stage. And suddenly the past few months rearranged themselves in my mind like puzzle pieces sliding into place. The vanished calendar invitations, the narrowed down distribution lists, the jokes about me being too thorough, the quiet meetings I wasn't invited to, the push to take credit for risk decisions he didn't understand. He didn't just want promotion. He wanted the promotion without me standing next to him. Because next to me, his knowledge gap was obvious. Alone, he could act like the architect. By 11:30, irritation had turned into something sharper. Not rage, clarity. I printed the audit logs and locked them in my desk. Not to use immediately, but because proof ages well, lies don't. At lunch, I sat outside with a takeout container, listening to the traffic from the highway and weighing my options. I could take this to HR. But HR protects managers, not engineers. I could go to leadership. But stepping over your boss without airtight evidence is suicide. I could confront him. But confrontation only works if the other person feels shame. Darren didn't. Darren felt opportunity. So the question wasn't, how do I fight him? The real question was, how do I make sure when the truth comes out, and it will, no one can pretend they didn't see it? A far more satisfying plan began forming. Slow, careful, and impossible for Darren to wiggle out of. He wanted a story where I was the incompetent obstacle. Fine, I'd give him a story, but not the one he expected. For the next few days, I worked like a man walking a tightrope, calm on the outside, calculating every step underneath. Darren behaved exactly as I expected. He hovered near my desk more than usual, pretending to check in, but really trying to measure my reaction. He needed signs of panic, frantic clicks, cursed whispers, the kind of chaos that says I'm in trouble. He got nothing. I restored a few harmless folders to the shared drive. Templates, outdated revisions, a few sanitized diagrams, enough to look like I was working on rebuilding without giving him anything he could claim credit for. The real work stayed on my secure mirror. Every time I opened it, I felt the same cold clarity. I wasn't rebuilding anything. I was watching a man burn the ground he thought I stood on, not knowing I had built a second floor. But clarity has another side, the part where you accept something you didn't want to accept. By Wednesday afternoon, it finally hit me. Not the betrayal. I'd seen that coming months ago. Not the risk. I'd built safeguards precisely because of people like him. It was something else. I'd spent 14 months building a system he didn't even respect enough to understand. That realization broke something in me. Not loudly, not dramatically. More like a beam cracking deep inside a wall, invisible, but final. I wasn't just dealing with a bad manager. I was dealing with a man who'd rewrite history, sabotage his own team, and endanger a 4.2-miler rollout if it meant climbing one rung higher. You don't fix that in a sync meeting. You don't solve it with feedback or alignment. You don't send him documentation hoping he'll grow. You outgrow him. The only question was how. Late Wednesday, after most of the team had left, I walked into the small server room. Cold air, blinking lights, the low white noise of machines actually doing their job. I leaned against the rack and closed my eyes for a moment. This was the place I trusted more than any conference room. Machines are honest. Logs don't lie. Systems don't smile while cutting your throat. And in that cold hum, something clicked. I wasn't just preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to leave. Not quietly, not dramatically, but in a way that made it impossible for Darren to rewrite what happened. He didn't know it yet, but everything he'd done had consequences baked into the architecture he tried to delete. The migration plan depended on me, not because I hoarded knowledge, but because the company never bothered to build redundancy for someone working at this depth. They wanted a single source of truth, and I'd been that for 14 months. Darren wanted to replace that truth with a story. Now he'd have to live with both. The shift started Thursday morning. I arrived at my desk to find Darren pacing near the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight. "No, we're still on track," he said. "No, nothing critical was lost. Mark's rebuilding everything. Yes, I'm guiding him through the architecture changes. Yes, we'll have revised documentation by Monday." He ended the call, straightened his shirt, and smiled at me like we were partners. "Bank wants a revised rollback plan ASAP," he said. "Let me know when you're done rebuilding." Rebuilding. That word felt like vinegar. "I'll let you know," I said. He nodded and walked off, probably to rehearse the next lie. But something about that call bothered me. Revised rollback plan? Monday? That wasn't on our timeline. I opened the project dashboard, the one Darren controlled. He had updated the rollout schedule, pushing the migration window forward by 3 weeks. 3 weeks? He'd moved the biggest, riskiest, most carefully orchestrated deployment of my career without a single conversation. Why? 2 possible reasons. 1, he wanted to deliver ahead of schedule so he could look like a hero. 2, he wanted the timeline tight enough that I couldn't possibly finish rebuilding. So leadership would ask why the project was behind, and he could point to the engineer. Both were believable. Both were stupid. Both were dangerous. But there was a third possibility, the one I didn't want to consider. If he believed he now owned the architecture, thanks to his magical sketch, he might actually think he could finish the project without me. That thought made my stomach tighten, because if he tried to run this rollout using his understanding of the system, it wouldn't fail quietly. It would fail catastrophically. Data loss, downtime, financial penalties, audit escalation, possibly even termination of the contract. The system wasn't fragile, but it wasn't built for fantasy diagrams. Darren wasn't just risking his job. He was risking the entire company's credibility. For the first time, fear crept in. Not for myself, for the engineers who'd be dragged into cleanup at 3 a.m., for the ops team who'd get blamed, for the client who'd lose trust, for the project I'd built with more pride than I wanted to admit. I needed to stop him. Not emotionally, not morally, but technically. If he pushed ahead, the failure would be pinned on me no matter how clean my work was. Because the person rewriting the story controls the ending, unless someone else writes it first. That afternoon, the second crack in the support beam came. A notification popped up. Calendar invite. BN42. Alignment meeting. Required. Organizer. D. Reynolds. Attendees. VP of Product, CIO, Director of Delivery, and me. He hadn't told me about this. He hadn't mentioned it in the morning call. He hadn't said a word. The description read, Mark will walk through the updated architecture based on my revisions. My revisions? A cold heat spread through my chest. He wasn't just preparing the narrative. He was launching it. He'd moved the deadline. He'd deleted the repo. He'd blamed me. And now he was putting me in front of leadership to present his fake architecture, the one that would collapse under even the simplest technical question. It wasn't a trap. It was an execution. I stared at the invite until the letters blurred for a moment. This wasn't irritation anymore. This was betrayal, sharpened into a spear. He wanted me to fail in front of the people who controlled promotions, budgets, and credibility. Then he'd step in, fix the parts I couldn't explain, and walk out looking like the architect who saved the engineer from his own incompetence. That was the plan. I stood up, walked to the restroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at my reflection. This is it, I whispered. Not a breakdown, not a panic attack. A moment of pure, cold understanding. If I let him push me into that room with nothing but his bad diagrams and a deleted repo, I would be finished. Not just here, in the industry. Reputations in tech don't collapse loudly. They implode silently. One story spreads. He didn't document. He wasn't reliable. He couldn't explain his own system. And suddenly, you're the problem. I dried my hands, walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my secure mirror. The real architecture, the real scripts, the real history. Line after line, version after version, evidence stacked like bricks. This wasn't about proving Darren wrong anymore. This was about proving myself right. To leadership, to the project, to the version of me who had spent 14 months building something worth more than a manager's ego. And as I scrolled through the logs, the diagrams, the commit notes, one truth settled in. Darren thought he had me cornered. He had no idea I'd already built the exit. He had no idea what was about to hit him. The alignment meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on Friday. By 8:01 a.m., I'd already made my decision. If Darren wanted this to be the stage where I fell apart in front of leadership, fine. We'd keep the stage. We'd just change the script. I didn't start with a speech. I started with a form. Our company has a dry little document called a Data Integrity Incident Report. Most people ignore it. They only think of it when something explodes and compliance comes knocking. I opened the portal, selected New Incident, and filled it out like I'd fill out a punch list on a job site. System, BN42 migration, impact, deletion of primary project repository and production aligned folder, date, time, observed, Tuesday, 7:42 p.m. Actions taken, verified against audit logs, confirmed deletion by manager account, project work, preserved via mirrored repository. Risk, potential misrepresentation of system status to client, risk to rollback capability, risk to audit trail integrity. Under details, I wrote one sentence the way a lawyer would. Deletion performed using manager account, user D. Reynolds, outside of change window with no corresponding ticket or documented approval. No adjectives, no emotion, just facts. I attached the audit log export. Then I hit submit. The system sent an automated notification to InfoSec, compliance, and my directors group inbox. 5 minutes later, I got the expected ping. Incident, number 4917, created. Owner, compliance, L. Frazier. Good. Now, no one in that 9:30 meeting could pretend this was just a miscommunication. It was officially an incident. Darren didn't know yet. That was important. At 9:27, I walked into the conference room. The CIO was at the head of the table, flipping through a printed agenda. The VP of product scrolled through her phone. The director of delivery had his laptop open to the dashboard. Darren stood near the screen, laptop connected, posture relaxed. He'd dressed up today, sharper suit, brighter tie. "Mark," he said, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. "Ready to walk through the updated architecture?" "Ready to walk through the current architecture," I replied, setting my notebook down. He didn't catch the difference. The CIO glanced up. "Let's get started," he said. "We're tight on time. Darren, context?" "Absolutely," Darren said smoothly. "We've been refining the rollout plan. Mark's been rebuilding some of the technical assets after a storage issue. But overall, we're ahead of schedule. Today, Mark will present the updated architecture based on my revisions, and will confirm we're ready to lock dates." Ahead of schedule. Storage issue. His narrative already live. "Before we do that," I said calmly, "I need to note something for the record." Darren's smile flickered. The CIO looked at me. "Go ahead." "This meeting touches the BN42 migration," I said. "As of 8:05 a.m., there is an open data integrity incident on that system. Incident NAWA 497. Compliance has been notified." The director of delivery stopped typing. The VP of product looked up fully now. The CIO's expression tightened by about 3 degrees, small but noticeable. "What incident?" he asked. Darren jumped in too fast. "We had a minor storage glitch, but it's under control. I told Mark." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cut him off sharply. I just spoke at the same time, a fraction steadier. "There was no storage glitch," I said. "The primary project folder and the main repo were manually deleted Tuesday evening using Darren's account, outside of any approved change window, with no ticket, no backup request, and no KB notification." The room went still. I clicked my laptop and mirrored my screen to the display. Audit log, timestamps, username, actions, no commentary. I didn't look at Darren. I looked at the CIO. "I discovered the deletion at 7:42 p.m., I continued. "Per policy, I verified against the logs, confirmed it wasn't an automated action, and preserved project integrity using my mirrored repository. The work is intact. The official record of it is not." Now I looked at Darren. "You told me not to involve IT, I added. "You said we should just rebuild everything clean and keep it quiet." I disagreed, so I followed policy. It wasn't an accusation. It was a report. The VP of product set her phone down slowly. "Darren," she asked, "is this accurate?" His face flushed, then tried to reset. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "The shared folder structure was a mess. I cleaned it out so we could rebuild according to my architecture. The repo had redundancies. It wasn't like I just nuked production." "No one said production," the CIO replied. His voice was very calm now, the way people sound when they're past irritation and into something colder. "We're talking about the project's single source of documentation and change history." Darren laughed weakly. "We have Mark. He remembers everything. And he always says he keeps backups. Look, this is just a misunderstanding about process." The director of deliveries spoke for the first time. "Did you open a change ticket before deleting the folder?" he asked. "No, but..." "Did you notify IT or compliance?" "No, but..." "Did you document your cleanup anywhere?" he pressed. Silence. The CIO looked at me. "Mark, do we have a complete current version of the architecture and scripts?" "Yes," I said, "in a secure mirror repository I maintain. It has full commit history, rollback plans, and risk notes. It's aligned to the approved design the bank signed off on. I can share it with delivery and compliance today." I didn't add the obvious. The only reason the project wasn't dead was because I hadn't trusted Darren months ago. The VP of product leaned forward. "Why wasn't this mirror listed in the official documentation?" she asked. "It is," I answered. "Page 3 of the technical overview, under redundancy and failover. The mirror is marked as internal only. Read access controlled. Darren signed off on that doc 6 months ago. Her eyes flicked to Darren. He swallowed. The room felt smaller. The door opened quietly. A woman in a navy blazer slipped in, laptop under her arm. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I was pulled into this incident. L. Fraser, compliance." Of course. Incident number 4917 had reached its owner. The CIO gestured to a seat. "You're just in time." She sat, opened her laptop, and scanned the screen. "I've reviewed the initial report," she said. "From what I see, we have manual deletion of a critical project repo and folder by a manager account without change control. That's not optional to investigate." "It was housekeeping," Darren insisted. "We're moving fast, and the structure needed to be reset. I assumed Mark had local copies." "That's not how change management works," she replied evenly. "You don't assume. You document. You request. You execute under control." The CIO exhaled. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. Darren, step out for a few minutes. Wait in my office." Darren stared at him. "Excuse me?" "This is now an active compliance issue," the CIO said. "I don't want you in the room while we review evidence. We're protecting you as much as the company." It wasn't kindness. It was procedure. Darren looked at me like I'd stabbed him, then at the others, realizing he had no allies here. He gathered his laptop a little too quickly and left, without another word. The door closed with a soft, final click. Chaos doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with one person being quietly removed from a room. The CIO turned back to me. "Mark," he said, "walk us through the real architecture. Start from the top." I pulled up the diagrams from my mirror and walked them through exactly what we had built. Not the fantasy version Darren had sketched, but the tested, documented, signed-off system. No drama, just facts. Data flow from legacy to staging, snapshot and rollback windows with real timings, dependencies between services, risk areas still being tuned, safeguards we'd added after early testing. I could feel the mood shifting. The director of delivery started asking detailed questions, the kind you only ask when you're actually paying attention. The VP of product took notes, highlighting the parts the client would care about most. Compliance marked sections related to auditability and rollback. Every answer I gave was tied to a log, a doc, a commit. There was nothing hand-wavy, nothing half-remembered. Eventually, the CIO leaned back. "Why wasn't this what we were seeing in the status decks?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Because Darren simplified the architecture for presentations," I said carefully. "Sometimes he removed risk notes or changed timing estimates to sound more confident. When I corrected details in front of the client, he asked me not to undercut him." I let that sit for a moment, then added, "I tried to keep the truth in the documentation, but if the person controlling the narrative doesn't show it, leadership doesn't see it." No one spoke for a few seconds. Compliance broke the silence. "For the record," she said, "Mark did the right thing by mirroring the project and logging the incident. If the mirror didn't exist, we'd be discussing a potential contract failure and audit escalation right now." That one sentence landed harder than any speech I could have given. The CIO checked his watch. "Here's the decision," he said. "We're freezing all timeline changes until this incident is fully reviewed. No new dates to the client. No architecture revisions without written approval from delivery and compliance." He paused. "Effective immediately, Darren is removed as project lead for BN42. Mark, you'll report directly to the director of delivery on this project until we decide on a new structure. We need this rollout executed by people who respect process." It wasn't a victory speech. It was more like a structural realignment after an earthquake. But it was enough. The meeting wrapped with a pile of action items. Compliance to conduct a formal review of the deletion incident. Delivery to pull all decks, invites, and decisions related to BN42 for the past 3 months. me to package and hand over the full mirrored repository and technical documentation. As we stood up, the VP of product looked at me. "Thank you for logging this," she said quietly. "You probably just saved us $4 million and a very ugly client call." "I like sleeping at night," I replied. On my way back to my desk, I passed Darren sitting in the CIO's office, shoulders stiff, talking with HR and compliance. Through the glass, I saw his face pale as they slid printed audit logs across the table. He had deleted a folder. I had handed them the story behind it, and the chaos he'd tried to bury under a clean directory structure was finally, properly, his. They didn't fire Darren that week. Companies rarely move that fast, especially when the problem isn't loud but structural. Compliance had to do interviews. HR had to draft reports. Leadership had to decide how far the damage went and who else had signed off on his shortcuts. I didn't push. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't hover around the CIO's office hoping to overhear news. I just did my job. The real job. The job he'd spent months pretending he understood. By Monday, I had the complete mirrored repository documented, packaged, and handed to delivery. By Tuesday, I'd revised the rollout plan with realistic timing and safeguards. By Wednesday, the bank's IT lead emailed me directly. "Thank you for the clarity in the documentation. This is the level of transparency we expect." That wasn't praise. That was trust. Something Darren never understood you couldn't fake. Thursday morning, HR scheduled a check-in. They always use soft language for hard conversations. The HR manager invited me into a quiet room with glass walls and a box of tissues no one had ever used. "First," she said, "thank you for raising the incident correctly. Compliance emphasized the value of your documentation." She clicked her pen and shifted papers. "Second, per internal review, Darren will be transitioning out of the organization. Not fired publicly. Not marched out with boxes. Transitioning. But HR speak doesn't hide consequences, and it just cushions them." "How long?" I asked. "Skeet. 2 weeks," she said. "Effective immediately, he is removed from all client-facing and technical responsibilities. He will handle knowledge transfer for other projects. Then exit." I nodded. It wasn't vengeance. It was math. Actions have invoices. He'd finally received his. "And one more thing," she added. "The CIO wants you to choose how you want to move forward. Your options are on the last page." I read them carefully. Option 1. Lead engineer on BN42, with a compensation adjustment and project authority. Option 2. Architect role across multiple migrations with reduced on-call and direct access to delivery. Option 3. Transition to a principal engineering path, focusing on systems integrity and serving as technical advisor during audits. They weren't promotions disguised as favors. They were roles shaped around someone the company didn't want to lose. I closed the folder. "Give me until end of day." "Of course," she said. But the truth is, I already knew. When I returned to my desk, the office felt different. I didn't fear Darren walking up behind me. I didn't brace myself for another calendar invite sent without context. I didn't wonder when he'd twist a status update to make himself look better. The space he used to occupy was empty, and the absence was peaceful. The kind of peaceful you feel when a machine stops making the noise you'd learned to ignore. Around noon, Ray, one of the few managers with genuine integrity, stopped by. "Heard about the changes," he said, leaning against my cubicle. "You holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. "It's funny," he said. "People think the worst kind of boss is the one who shouts. It's not. It's the one who lies quietly." He tapped the top of my monitor lightly. "Good work. Leadership needed to see the truth." He walked away without waiting for thanks. The best people in an office never need applause. That afternoon, I finished the last of the migration tuning. The architecture, the real one, was solid, stable, predictable, built the way systems should be built, with clarity instead of shortcuts. At 4:45, I closed my editor and went to the rooftop patio. The sun was low, warm against the railing. I don't know why, but I took a long breath, the kind you take when something inside you shifts into place. Peace isn't loud. It's the absence of noise you didn't know you were carrying. Sometime after 5, the CIO joined me. He's a quiet man, not one for speeches. "Good work today," he said. "Thank you." He stared across the skyline for a few seconds. "You know," he said, "I looked through the commit history in your mirror. The detail is impressive. That level of record-keeping saved us a multi-million-dollar problem." "It wasn't meant for this," I said. "I just don't like depending on luck." He nodded. "That's why I want you in the architect role. We need someone whose decisions are grounded in reality, not presentation." There it was, without HR language, honest, direct. "I'll take it," I said. He didn't shake my hand. He just nodded once, the way engineers do when something important is settled without ceremony. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the quiet. No adrenaline, no anger, no pacing. Just stillness. For months, I'd been living with a slow poison, a manager rewriting my work under me, shaping narratives I'd never agreed to, deleting things I'd built because he thought ownership and authorship were the same thing. Now that weight was gone. Not because I'd won a fight, because I'd refused to play one. I protected the system, I protected the project. And then quietly, I let the truth do the rest. I poured a glass of water, leaned back in the chair, and let the day settle. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was something better. Closure. The next morning, I came in early, opened a fresh document, titled it BN42, Final Rollout Notes, and began writing with a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. The first sentence came easily. When truth is documented, it doesn't need defending. And for once, in a long string of chaotic months, everything, from the architecture diagrams to the career I'd nearly lost, finally aligned.